So good morning. Today's daf, as we come to the close of Chagigah, and not only Chagigah, but God willing, obviously with Chagigah, we'll be completing the Seder Moed. So very exciting. Our Siyum will be, God willing, this coming Motzi Shabbos, a communal-wide Siyum, or again, not just Chagigah, but entire Seder Moed. Please join us. So yesterday we learned the Mishnah at the bottom of Abdallah Mabed, top of Amid Aleph, that highlighted a stringency regarding Truma that does not apply to Kodesh. And the prior Mishnah listed a whole bunch of ways in which we are stricter with respect to Kodesh than we are with respect to Truma, but we got one in the other direction yesterday. And that was specifically in Am Haaretz, in the area of Yehuda, is believed regarding the Tara status of wine or oil at all times of year when it comes to Kodesh, but when it comes to the Tara status of Truma, they are only believed during the wine pressing and olive season. So the
David,
Gemara begins with the implications that the Mishnah specifically mentions Yehuda. So
your sound is
Yehuda,
breaking up, David.
my sound is breaking up. I'm getting feedback from. Do you have like an air conditioner or a blower there?
Hold on. Do I have no? Do I have what on?
Like an air conditioner
AirPod?
or fan or something like that?
No.
Oh. All right, if you let me try muting you, and obviously, certainly unmute yourself if you have an issue, if you have a question. But let me do that, and then okay, there you go. Okay, if it's still choppy, let me know. Okay, but hopefully that should address the choppiness. Okay, so that implies, again, we reference Yehuda as being the location in the Mishnah. So be Yehuda in, Uva Galil lo, right? So that implies that it's only an issue in Yehuda, but not in Galil. So my time, what's the reason? Why shouldn't the same belief system work in the Galil? So Amaresh Lakish Ritzua Shalkusim Mafsekes Beinayim, because the Galil is separated from Yehuda, where the location is of the Beis Hamikdash, by a strip of land, and that strip of land where the Kutim are apparently at least is being considered as if it was outside of the land of Israel. There's a debate among Rishonim whether this is, the degree to which this exists. Was this really a strip of land that isn't part of Israel, or are we just treating it like a land that isn't part of Israel? But in any event, the point is that there's a piece of land that we're treating like it's not part of Israel, and the rabbis made a decree that anyone outside of Israel or any land outside of Israel, we're worried may have bodies buried there, and so as a result, we need to treat it as tameh. And so as a result, so you can't go from Galil to Yehuda without causing the barrel to become tameh. So if the person is from the Galil and has brought the food from the Galil, so then that's why they're not believed, because they went through this land, and as a result, the wine or the oil must have become tameh. So now we're going to try to say, hey, there are ways that you could avoid that, and we're going to end up concluding that at least the author of our Mishnah does not agree with them. So v'nesi b'shida teva umigdal. So in second, let it be in a some kind of a carriage, a trunk, some kind of closet, basically put it in some structure and have it be effectively in an ohel, and the floor of that ohel will serve as a roof to the tumah, so stopping the tumah from reaching the area above it, and that will allow the transport of the oil or wine without it becoming tameh. So Hamani, no, that doesn't work, because who's the author of our Mishnah? Rebbe he, the Amar Ohel Zaruk Lav Shmei Ohel, because he's the one who says that a thrown ohel is not considered an ohel. So basically, if it's not If it's not standing still, it is not an ohel, and therefore does not serve as a separation from any tuma that's below it. Tanya, because we learned in a brisa, if somebody were to go into the outside of Israel, the land outside of Israel, the land of the other nations, so in a carriage trunk closet, so Rebbe says, tough luck. You still stay. You still are tame. Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yehuda matar. However, Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says that you're tahor. So now, on second attempt number 2. So that was, so attempt number 1 was let him be in a carriage trunk or closet, and now attempt number 2 is okay. Well, put it in an earthenware vessel. We've seen before that an earthenware vessel stops tuma in its tracks. It can't go through it, and so as a result, won't that work? So Rabbi Eliezer shown in Ein HaKodesh Nitzel B'Tzamid Pasil. It works in general, but we have a brisa that says that Kodesh does not get protected from an earthenware vessel. So therefore, that's going to be a problem. V'hatanya, so in second, Ein Chatas Nitzelas B'Tamid Pasil. 1 second, we say that chatas water, namely the water that we sprinkle on somebody who is tamei meis, that is not saved. So my love hakodesh nitzul, doesn't that imply that kodesh is saved? Meaning we say a more extreme statement with respect to an earthenware vessel. So shouldn't that imply that in fact, when it, shouldn't that imply that there's a differing opinion from the first brisa? That the first brisa said ein kodesh nitzul b'tzamid psil, that a kodesh does not get saved. But here we say a brisa that tells us that only chatas water is not saved. That implies that kodesh should be saved, because if we remember back to our 5 levels of status, there's chulin, then there's Meiser Sheni, then there's Truma, then there's Kodesh, then there's Chatas water. So that's the 5th, that's the holy, that's the the most susceptible to Tuma. So doesn't that imply that it would be that while it would not be saved, something that's Kodesh would be saved? And the Gemara answers, Lo hayamayim she'ein mekudashim nitzulim b'tzamid p'sil. No, what it really is telling us is that regular water will be saved. It's water with the ashes that are not going to be saved. So that's the issue. So it does not tell us anything about Kodesh, that second brisa. And so as a result, we are still stuck with the situation that there's no way to get from Galil to Yehuda without making your things tameh. V'ha'amar Ula chavraya midakan b'Galila. 1 second, but Ula taught that the chaverim, the people who were knowledgeable, they would prepare wine and oil in a state of tara in the Galil. So doesn't that show that they must have brought it to the Beis Hamikdash, or had it there, and or at least thought that they could bring it to the Beis Hamikdash without causing it to become tamei? So no, manichim, no, this was all oil and wine that was set aside for later. Eliyahu would come and tell us exactly how we can go from one place to the other. So as Rashi says, middle of the narrow lines on Kav Hey Amud Aleph, Shema Yavo Eliyahu v'Yera Elahen Shavil Ba She'enu Me'eretz Ha'amim. He'll show a path, a strip of land that is not from Eretz Ha'amim, from the rest of the nations of the world, and it is actually part of Israel. And so that would be how you would get from the Galil to Yehuda. So Ubishas Hagitos. So now we go back to the next piece of our Ubishas. You have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
It says that the Mishnah talked about not being believed or something, Na'amanim.
Yes.
But this is just saying that there's no way to actually, it's automatically tameh. So why would you even have a question of like believability if it's physically impossible to get it from A to B without it becoming tameh. Like if it's physically impossible, then it's not a question of believability. It's
Yeah,
automatically
you
tameh.
you you are absolutely right. But the Mishnah began by talking about believability, right? So the believability applies by Yehuda. So you're absolutely right that effectively it goes beyond believability. It's not only the person not believed, but in fact, it is in fact tameh if they were to say that they brought it from that place. And in fact, we will see as we go that is also that when we don't believe the person, it will turn out that the thing is actually tameh, and we'll have a most extreme case at the end of today's daf where we believe the person about the contents of a vessel, but the vessel itself we end up treating as tameh. So you are 100% right that effectively the Gemara ties the two issues together. And what they're doing by saying about believability is effectively making a stronger statement that not only do we say that his thing is tahor, but we agree that with him. Now, of course, remember that we're saying that his thing is tahor only because he tells us that it's tahor. So it's not an automatic thing. So there are two aspects for the object to be tahor. First is that it can't have come from the Galil, but the second thing is that the individual, the Am Haaretz, who is telling us it, has to say, I was protecting it and making sure it stayed tahor. So you do need both aspects in Yehuda to be tahor. But it turns out that nothing is good enough from the Galil. And so effectively the Mishnah is telling us the strong case about what is required in Yehuda, and we are implying something. And you're absolutely right. The implication is more than just the fact that the person's not believed. They're not believed because it's not possible. So it's just telling us. The implication is actually a less extreme case than what we're actually saying is the case. But the Gemara
Usually
is
believability, like demai or something, like it could have been done, but we don't believe you did it. That's usually the
correct,
way believability
correct, correct.
believability is framed. Here it's just, anyway, it's a different thing here.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The point is that if the Mishnah were trying to tell us about Galil explicitly, you are absolutely right that it should say that if it's from the Galil, it's tameh. But the Mishnah was only telling us about believability. And so the implication about that is that believability does not exist in the Galil. The explanation for why believability doesn't exist in the Galil is even stronger than believability. It's actually tameh. So you are 100% right that effectively it's not like one of these things is not like the other, but the Mishnah was not. That was not the main message of the Mishnah. So as a result, the Mishnah doesn't need to use the Mishnah is using the language focusing on what is permitted as opposed to what is prohibited. So it's one can view it as a classic example of koch de hetera adif, that they're trying to highlight what it takes for the oil and wine to be permitted, and not focusing on the status of when it is not permitted. Okay, so our Mishnah also mentioned that when it comes to Truma, an Am Haaretz is believed during the wine and oil pressing seasons. So let's take a look at the language from the Mishnah. Uvishas hagitos ne'emanim ap al hatruma, right? So specifically in the wine pressing season, and of course we also had mentioned the oil pressing season, that then the Am Haaretz is believed with respect to Truma. But Minhu, 1 second, is that really true? It seems like we have a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Tahoros that says Hagomer Zesav, that when an Am Haaretz is finishing the gathering of his olives, Yishar Kupa Achas v'Tanena la'ani haKohen, that he should, before he finishes completing the gathering of the olives from the field, he should take one box and leave it aside, and that will be the Truma. And he can give that box to the Kohen. And the reason that the Kohen will be able to accept that box is because olives and fruit generally do not become even susceptible to tuma, even if they touch a liquid, until the gathering process is done. And so as a result, because these were put aside before the gathering process was done, the Kohen knows that it's not tameh. So doesn't that show that in fact we don't believe the Am Haaretz? So Rav Nachman, lo kasha, haba charfe, haba afle. No, that one case is when the crop is early. If you are collecting your crop early, well, meaning before the time of the pressing season, well, then you're fine, because then you can use the timing of the pressing season to be believed. But haba afle, in the case in the Mishnah in Toros, it's talking about where the person is collecting late. It is already, as Rashi says, 7 lines up in the narrow lines. Be'afle shekvar avarzman hagitos leruba de alma ka'amar delo mehemen. So the season for pressing has already passed for most of the world, and so as a result, it's talking about that the person's not believed. So therefore, that's the issue. So therefore, we've come up with an explanation. So our Mishnah is talking about where you collect before the olive pressing season, and so as a result, you're able to be believed. Whereas if you collect your olives only after the pressing season has finished, well, then you need to set aside a box in order to be believed, so that you can give it as truma. So Amar Rav Nachman, so Amar le Rav Ada bar Ahava Kagon Mai. Tell me more about this kind of late olive crop. What is that crop? What is that about? And so Ka'osin shel beis avicha, it's like those of your father's house. And Rashi says, Aflei habu, those crops, his father happened to be a late crop collector. And so as a result, that's the kind of olive version you need to have, either be a chaver, or you need to set aside the olives in a box before you finish collecting, in order for it to be able to be given as truma. Rav Yosef Omer, Rav Yosef offers a second possible explanation. Maybe the difference between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Taros is the Galila Shanu. Maybe the Mishnah in Taharos is talking about when you're in the Gilil. And just as we say that there's no believability with respect to Kodesh in the Galil, maybe we'll say that there's no believability with respect to Teruma in the Galil. So Abaye challenged it, because we have a brisa that says, Aver hayardin v'hagalil harei hein ki Yehuda ne'emanim al hayayin b'shas hayayin b'al hashemen b'shas hashemen. That when it comes to Teruma, the other side of the Yarden and the Galil are just like Yehuda, in that people are believed with respect to their wine during the time of wine pressing, and shemen and their olive with respect to the olive pressing season. Aval lo al hayayin b'shas hashemen v'lo al shemen b'shas hayayin, but not in the vice versa seasons. So we see that when it comes to pressing seasons, Amei Haaretz are trusted even in the Galil. So clearly, our Mishnah, or the Mishnah in Ohalos, can't just be talking about the Galil, because that would contradict another brisa. So Ela Mechavarta Kedishinon Meikara. So the answer is as we answered initially. Okay, so that is part number 2 of our Mishnah. Part number 3 of our Mishnah noted that while we don't believe the Am Haaretz regarding Truma, not at the time of the pressing season, the Am Haaretz can take back the barrel and give it to the Kohen at the next pressing season. So Rav Sheshes wants to know whether the Kohen can set it aside instead of having it go back to the Am Haaretz and have the Am Haaretz set it aside. So Avru Hagitos B'Habadim V'Heviu Lo Chavis Hayayin Shel Yayin lo yikablenu, right? So if the Ama Aretz brings him an oil and it's not at the pressing season, so you shouldn't accept it. Lo yikablenu mehemenu. You shouldn't accept it from him. Aval menicha legas haba, but rather the Am Haaretz can leave it for the future, for the next season. So by minei Rav Sheshes, so they asked of Rav Sheshes. They asked of Rav Sheshes of our the kib. Well, what happens if they actually accepted it? Are they allowed to set it aside for the next? Can the Kohen set it aside for the next pressing season?
I don't know. How does that help them to set it aside for the next pressing season? What is that?
Because at the next pressing season, if remember, it does. You don't need the Am Haaretz is remarkably is not asked. Is this a product of this season? So even if it's from last season, he will be believed that it is tahor. And so it is about the timing that enables him to be believed. So if he takes it back and holds it until the next pressing season and says and brings it back to the Kohen and says this is tahor, we believe him. And so as a result, the same, maybe you could say that we'll hold on to it until the next pressing season, and we'll ask him at that point in time, is it in fact tahor? Was it in fact tahor? He will say, yes, it was tahor, and so he will be believed, and as a result, we can accept it and use it. So now Rav Sheshes explains and says, maybe Amar Lahu Tenisua. What about the following Mishnah? And this Mishnah is from Demai, and it says, Chaver va'am haaretz yarshu es avihim am haaretz. So a Chaver and his brother, who's in Am Haaretz, inherit from their father, who's in Am Haaretz. And they say, Yachol Lomar, the Chaver's allowed to say, Tol atachitin shibamakom poloni. You keep the wheat that's in this place, vani chitim shibamakom poloni, and I'll keep the wheat that's in that place. Tol atayayin shibamakom poloni. You keep the wine in this place, vani yayin shibamakom poloni, and I'll keep the wine that's in that place. And the chaver, as we'll see in Rashi, can distinguish and make sure that he's saying that he gets the stuff that is tahor, and the stuff that is tameh gets kept by his brother, the Am Haaretz. Abalo Yomar Lo, but he's not allowed to say, Tola Talach, you keep all the wet stuff, Va'ani Yavesh, and I'll take all the dry stuff. Tola Tachitin, you take all the wheat, Va'ani Soren, and I'll take all the barley, right? The point is that the split has to be of the same stuff. Okay, and why? So Rashi explains. We'll take a look in Rashi inside, top Rashi on the daf. Shiyodeya. So we're talking about Shiyodeya behen shehuksharu, because he knows that the chaver knows that some of it has become hukshar lil kabel tuma, that has become prepared to become tameh because it's been in contact with liquid, or it itself is a liquid. Va'aniya tol chitim b'makom poloni. I'm going to take the chitim in another place, Shiyodeya shelo hukshar, because I know that it was not yet prepared to become Makabel Tuba. The Kavan, the Chadmina Hain, because they're all considered one species. Amrina and Yesh Breira. We can say that between them, there's Yesh Breira, that when they were given, this was always his, and that was always the other brothers. She'ilu hain chalku shelzeh, she'ilu hain chalku shelzeh, ve'ilu hain chalku shelzeh, that each one had his portion. Below hichlif lo chaver la'am haaretz chalko, and there's no transfer of portions between the brothers. Shebitameyin b'shvil so below hichlif lo chaver la'am haaretz chalko shebitameyin b'shvil chalko shel am haaretz shebitahorin, that you're not switching around tahor and tameh. That about b'shnei minin. However, when it comes to two different kinds of things, ein lomer breira, we don't say breira. Because when their father died, every min was split evenly between the brothers. That there's a problem of over because we're worried that the Am Haaretz brother is going to cause the food to become tameh, and that in fact is a problem. We don't want to just willy-nilly cause food to become tameh, and so as a result, the rabbis set a gzeira that prohibits the one brother from a chaver from selling tahor food to an Am Haaretz. So that's going to be a problem. So as a result, so V'tani Allah. So now that we've made this, that we have this teaching, so now how does that imply anything about our case of whether a Kohen can store? Well, also chaver sorev hale. So what is first of all, and then we got to explain. So what does the person have to do? So also chaver sorev halach umaniach asayavish. So he needs to burn the liquid truma because he has to assume that it's tameh, and he can leave the dry truma because so the food that he's going to set aside that is truma from the liquid, that stuff that he gets, it has to be burned, but the dry stuff he can keep, and because it has not become tameh. So amai, why does he have to do all this? Yanichenu legas haba, let him leave it for the next pressing season. Meaning, if in fact the answer to the question to Rav Sheshes is the fact that that the Kohen can hold on to it and leave it, well then in this case, let the guy just leave it over to the next pressing season when it'll be believed. So no, this is not a good proof, because two possibilities. B'davar she'ein lo gas. It could be that there's no pressing season for it. For example, Rashi, I believe, mentions that it could be date beer. So date beer doesn't have a specific pressing season. You can make it all year round, and so as a result, there is no specific time when the person would be believed, and so there's nothing to be done about it. And we say let him set it aside for the holidays, because we also know that holidays is another time where an Am Haaretz is believed temporarily. So b'davar she'eino mishtamer l'regel, maybe it is something that won't keep until the next holiday. So in the end, we cannot bring a proof, and so the Gemara is unable to answer the question that Rav Sheshes was asked about whether or not we're allowed to set it aside. And I believe that there's a machlok, because I think at least some people say that that a Kohen remarkably could set it aside. Okay. Now the next piece of the Mishnah, V'im Amar Hifrashti L'tochel Revius Kodesh Naaman, that remarkably, if the Am Haaretz says about the barrel of oil that it had a little bit of Kodesh in it, then he is believed. So 1 second. Tanan Hassam, we learned in the Mishnah, and this Mishnah is in Olos. So Modin Beis Shammai Ubeis Hillel Shabodkin Laose Pesach. That now we're going to talk about the laws of a Beis Hapras. A Beis Hapras is a graveyard that was plowed up, and as a result, there could be bones anywhere. I shouldn't say graveyard. It's a field in which there was a grave that was then plowed up. So as a result, in any location in the field, there could be a bone, and therefore we don't want people to pass through it, because they might become tameh. So Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai agree that one could pass through by checking exactly where they are. We're going to define checking in a moment, but that you could check the field as you go through it if you are on your way to bring a Pesach offering. And we'll explain, because we don't want to delay somebody on their way to make a Pesach offering, because the timing is precious. The ein bodkin la'ochle truma. But when you don't have a pressing deadline, when you're just going to try to eat truma, so then you do not get to check. Okay, so and so take a look. The ein bodkin la'ochle truma. Ein somchen ala bedika al bedika zu. Rashi in the middle, about 15, 20 lines down. Ein bodkin la'ochle truma. Ein somchen ala bedika zu. De kevan de ein zman kavua la'achila yamtin shivas yamim ve'yiz shlishi ushvi ve'yitbol. So since you don't have to eat truma at any point in time, you could just treat yourself as tamei mace. Get sprinkled on days 3 and 7, and then go to the mikveh, and then you'll be tahor. Aval gabi Pesach, but when it comes to Pesach, whole beis hapras derabanan, since beis hapras is only a rabbinic issue, lo hamidu divrayim b'makom kares, we're not going to hold you up with respect to kares, because we want to enable you to go to the Beis Hamikdash to be able to offer your sacrifice. Okay, so my bodkin, what does bodkin mean? So we have a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel and Rabbi Chia bar Abba in the name of Ula. So Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel minapeach adam beis hapras v'holech. You blow on the ground before you make each step to make sure to blow any bone fragments away out of your path. The Rabbi Chia bar Abba b'shmei de Ula Amar beis hapras shenidash tahor. No, what are you doing to check? A beis hapras that has been trampled on, meaning if hundreds of people have gone over this field, then you're allowed to walk through it, because it presumably the trampling has gotten rid of any of the remaining bone fragments. And so as a result, that's going to be okay. Therefore, that will lead to every. So what are you checking? So your check is to check to see whether the field was trampled, and if it is, you're okay. So those are the two definitions of checking. Excuse me. So the osei Pesach. So again, we said that those who go are going to make a Pesach offering. Lo hamidu divreihem b'makom kares. Why do we say that? Because we're not going to keep that rabbinic rule when it comes to kares. Loche truma. However, if somebody who's ochel truma, hamidu divreihem b'makom misa. When it comes to misa b'dei shamayim, which is a lower level than which is a higher level. So then that is we don't want to risk anything. So we're not going to allow him to pass through. Okay. So So next,
Shemayim is worse than karet?
Yes, that's my understanding. I somehow thought the other way around initially, but I'm pretty sure that the idea here is that. Let's see for a second. Yeah, I think the idea is that the Misa Bidei Shemayim is more significant, and so as a result, that's why the rabbis say no. In that case, we're going to prevent you from walking through, but Misa but Kares is lesser. So basically, it's Misa Bidei Adam, Misa Bidei Shemayim, and then Kares. That's the order of the big three.
I see. Okay. We're talking about a Kohen, right?
Yes, we're talking about a Kohen who, the first case does not have to be a Kohen. The first case could be anybody. But when it comes to Truma, obviously we're talking about a Kohen. But the person who's bringing the Korban Pesach, that could be a person.
But does a Kohen doesn't have to? He has to eat his Truma in Yerushalayim?
No, he has to eat his Truma in Tara. So the first part is talking about somebody who's going to Yerushalayim. The second category, when it comes to Truma, it could be any situation where he's thinking about walking through a Beis Hapras. And that's the point. The point is that he could just go around. So we're not going, the timing pressure is not so severe. So as a result, we're going to say, listen, either go around, or if it's really so important for you to go through, so go through and treat yourself as Tamei Mace and go through the Tahara process. Okay, so Iblailahu, so Badak Lepisco. So if you checked for Pesach, Mahu Sheyolcho B'Truma, so is it good enough now that if you were doing it because you were going to bring the Pesach offering, but now you also are a Kohen that wants to eat Truma, what's the story? Are you allowed to rely on the same thing for both? So Ula Amar Badak Lepisco Mutar Le'achol B'Truma, so Rabba Bar Ula Amar Badak Lepisco Asur Le'achol B'Truma, so we see Ula says it's okay, but Rabba Bar Ula says no. Interesting, the machlokas between a father and son. So Amar Lei Hahu Saba. So the person said to Rabba Bar Ula, Lo Tiflog Alei Ula Tanan Kavase. Don't argue with Ula because we actually have a Mishnah in his consistent with him. Because take a look in our Mishnah, the Im Amar Hifrashti Lusocha Revius Kodesh Ne'eman. Because if he says that a quarter of a log of the oil, as we said in our Mishnah, a quarter of the log is Kodesh, well, then he's trusted with respect to the Tahara of the entire oil in the entire container. So Alma de Mehemen, a Kodesh, Mehemen Nami, a Truma, that since we believe him with respect to the Kodesh, he's also believed with respect to the Truma. So Hachinami de Mehen, a Pesach, Mehemen Nami, a Truma. So to here, once we have a field that is kosher with respect to Kodesh, we'll also say it's kosher with respect to Truma. And so Rashi explains, Migu de Mehemen HaKodesh, Mehemen HaTruma, Shegenayu leMizbeach. We don't want to sort of treat the Mizbeach so lowly, Shetei Truma HaMechuberes Lo B'Cheskes Tuma, that somehow the Truma that came connected to this field is considered a Tameh. The HaKodesh, Yakriv leMizbeach, and yet the Kodesh can be brought to the Mizbeach. And similarly with the oil in our container, if we allow the oil in the container, if we treat the oil in the container that's truma differently from the kodesh, then again it will be somewhat embarrassing to the mizbeach. So that brings us to the next piece of our Mishnah. So Kadeh Yayin v'Kadeh Shemen. What about jugs of wine and jugs of oil? So Tana, we learned in a brisa, Einam on him. Now again in our Mishnah we said. What did we say in our Mishnah? In our Mishnah, we said that an Am Haaretz is believed regarding jugs of wine or oil that have contents that include chulin, truma, and kodesh. But a brisa says that the Am Haaretz is not trusted about jugs or truma, which seems to conflict with our Mishnah. So the Gemara is going to explain. So Tana einam on him, lo ala kankanim, lo ala truma, that the person is not believed with respect to either the containers nor the truma. So kankanim demai. So what kind of jugs are we talking about? E kankanim de kodesh. If we're talking about jugs of kodesh, migu de mehemen kodesh. Well, 1 second. Since they're believed with respect to the kodesh, mehemen nami kankanim, they should be believed with respect to the jugs. Ela kankanim de truma, but it must be that we're talking about jugs of truma. Well, then pshita hashta a truma lo mehemen a kankanim mehemen. If you're not believed with respect to the truma itself, why would you believe with respect to the truma? So Ella bere kanim de kodesh. Now we're talking about empty vessels, ubishar yamos hashana, and we're talking about the rest of the year. Ubimulayan de truma ubishasakitos. That when it comes to empty vessels that held kodesh all through the year, that is not going to be considered tahara. That we're going to treat an empty vessel that belongs to an Am Haaretz as tameh, even if they say it was tahor, and even if we said they say it had kodesh in it, and we accepted the kodesh from them. But when it comes to being filled with truma during the time of the pressing season, we'll believe them with respect to the truma that's in it, but we will not believe them with respect to the jugs themselves. So as a result, the idea is that because it was not necessary for Kohanim Chaverim, for knowledgeable Kohanim, to accept the Truma in a vessel. Rather, they could transfer the Truma to their own vessel. So as a result, the rabbis did not enable the believability to extend to the vessels themselves. The believability is only with respect to the contents of Truma. So Tanan, we have, we learned in a Mishnah. So in our Mishnah, Kadeh Yayin v'Kadeh Shemen Hamidumaos, that have mixtures in them. And again, we explained in our Mishnah, because otherwise it was very unclear what we were talking about, that we're talking about a container that has chulin, truma, and kodesh in it, but we have not really proven that. And now the Gemara is going to ask and explain what's the contents of this container. So my love medumos. Medumos just means that it's mixed. So the truma. So doesn't this just mean truma and chulin? So isn't that what we're talking about? And so we see that during the pressing season, Amei Haaretz are believed with respect to the vessels themselves. So Amrei Devei Rabbi Chia, no. The people in the yeshiva Rabbi Chia say, no, Midumaos the Kodesh. No, we're talking about where there's Kodesh mixed in. Umiika Demua the Kodesh. 1 second. There's no such thing as Demua of Kodesh. Demua is a mixture of Chulin and Truma. So that's not what we're talking about. So Amri Debei Rabbi Law. So they clarified, the yeshiva Rabbi Law clarifies the mitar as tivlo litol mimenu nefsach. That the point is that he had tevel, he had a truma chulin combination, and he said, I'm going to take pieces of this for the Kodesh. And as a result, because we're going to believe him with respect to the Kodesh, we're going to believe him with respect to the rest of the contents of that vessel. So
Well, I don't understand that. How can he, if he designated something for Truma, right? He doesn't even own it anymore, doesn't, right?
no, it's demai. He is not yet separated. He needs to separate it from Truma.
I thought that was Tevel. Tevel it's
Tevel is before it's been separated.
right.
So
Tevel
he has not put the name Truma on any particular piece of the contents. It's just somewhere inside he's going to put the Truma name on. And similarly, somewhere inside he's going to put his Kodesh in. It's not like he separated the Truma and then and separated Kodesh and then poured it all back in. He's got a mixture that he's going to use to give some as Truma to the Kohen and some as Kodesh to the Beit HaMikdash. That's what he comes and tells you.
But if it's already Truma, if he did separate it for Truma, all right, he can't make that hekdesh. I mean, he doesn't.
Correct. The piece that he's going to make hekdesh is going to be a piece that is not from the Truma. And basically, this is a case where we would say Brera, that once he identifies each piece within the thing, it was always that liquid. It was always that liquid that was Truma. It was always that liquid that was Kodesh. This is because it was before he separated it. He didn't separate it and then mix it all together. He has yet to separate it. And so as a result, he's going to be able to separate it. And because he's telling you that a piece of what was contained in here is Kodesh, you, the Kohen, are allowed to say, okay, I will, and is Kodesh and Tahor, you are allowed to say, okay, since you were watching that Kodesh piece to make sure it remained Tahor, I'm going to be able to believe you, even not during the pressing seasons, that this is going to be, that this is Tahor Truma.
Okay, it sounds like he'd be, if he could figure out a way to never put it together and to just say, okay, maybe it's all
well,
right.
if he had 3 separate vessels, right?
Yes.
If he had a vessel of Chulin, a vessel of Truma, and a vessel of Kodesh, the
Right.
vessel of Chulin would be treated as Tameh. The vessel of Truma would be treated as Tameh unless it's during the vessel of Truma would be treated as Tameh, except but the contents would be considered Tahor because we believe him if it's during the pressing season. During the rest of the year, the whole thing would be Tameh. And the Kodesh, we believe the contents are always Tahor, and the container is Tahor as long as it's full. So, but if it's as soon as it becomes empty, it becomes Tameh.
Mhm. Okay. And
Okay, so those are
the vessel would not mitame at the contents. The would not. It's just a rabbinic.
that's the remarkable thing about the middle case, about the container of truma, that we believe him during the pressing season regarding the contents, but not regarding the container. That the rabbis basically said we're going to still treat the container as tameh, but we're not going to have it make the contents tameh. So that's the remarkable case that we just said. And yes, there is there's an aspect that doesn't make any sense in that, but it was about, again, we have to remember that this was all about trying to not have the Amei Haaretz feel excluded to such a degree that they would go ahead and set up their own bamot, their own new religion. So that was what we're trying to achieve. So we're trying to include them just enough to make sure that we actually observe the laws of true tahara, but not so much that we're interfering with the laws of tahara, and etc. So they're trying to walk a very fine line, pushing to the degree so that as long as they are not going to set some alternative religion to compete.
You're saying that the laws here are more political than they are in reality.
Yes, three dapim ago, or maybe two or three dapim ago, we explicitly said that the reason for all of this is mibnei eva, that we don't want the Amei Haaretz to hate us. And so as a result, that's how that's where the lines were drawn in order to try and prevent the hatred. And the reason that we said with respect to Truma that we can sometimes exclude them is because they'll find an Am Haaretz Kohen. They don't need to give it to a Chaver Kohen. They can give it to an Am Haaretz Kohen. So there won't be that much animosity. But when it came to Kodesh, then there's going to be a lot of animosity. And obviously, you don't tell the I assume that the idea is that the Chaver Kohen would not tell the Am Haaretz person who's bringing him the Truma, oh, I need to remove your stuff from your container because I'm going to treat your container as Tameh. But and so I can't take your container. I'm just going to pour your container into my container because I'm going to let you go back with your container because I'm going to save you the money so you don't have to waste your container. So that, you don't need to detail all the details in connection with that. All right, so let's quickly get to the Mishnah and then we'll conclude. Kodem Lagitos Shivim Yom. So before the wine pressing, you go for 70 days. The person is believed for 70 days. So Amar Abaye Shmamina Dinahu de Ilave Arisa Lemitrach Agufe Shivim Yomin Mikame Ma'atzarta. So what you learn from this is why is it that the person's believed 70 days? Because they begin to prepare the vessels 70 days ahead of time. And so as a result, this shows that if you are a sharecropper, your obligations to begin to prepare vessels 70 days ahead of time so that you will be able to have containers for all of your contents and be able to share that profit with the owner of the land. And so with that, tomorrow we'll continue with questions of believability, of when do we believe, what other times do we believe in Am Haaretz, and we'll talk about the making of earthenware vessels, which were crucial to the Beis Hamikdash. Have a wonderful day.
Right. Thank you, David.
Bye-bye.